Thank you, Sir Robert.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Robert. I'd like to see you in the chair. I thank everyone who has spoken in the debate, and I congratulate the honourable member opposite for his retaining his place in the shadow transport team. It's been a very interesting debate, and I'm grateful to colleagues for all of the contributions that they have made on a very important sector, as well as an important matter of local importance to the issues, a matter of considerable local importance to the constituencies involved. Let me start, if I may, by reiterating the apology which my noble friend, Baroness Vere, has already given to the Honourable Member for East Worthing and Shoreham. And I know that she and he are going to be meeting up, I think, in a matter of a few days, and I look forward to that being a constructive and engaging conversation, and I'm delighted to be able to respond to his concerns in this debate as well. And as he will know, the government regards the aviation sector as a whole as an extremely important and indeed a strategic asset to the UK, which contributes at least £14 billion to our GDP every year, and which supports some 230,000 jobs across all regions of the country. So we recognise the sector's importance both geographically and economically. And of course, it's very important to focus here, as honourable friends have done, on the very dire impact that these failures of training operators have had on the students involved, because there's a tremendous human cost, and that's been very well brought out in the speeches that have been made. And I can have a particular sense of identification with it. I have a pilot's license myself, long since tragically fallen out of use, but there it is, paid for not by Bank of Mum and Dad, but out of my own earnings. In case the honourable member's opposite is wondering, I'm the son of a pilot, I'm the brother of pilots, I'm the nephew of a pilot, I'm the grandson of a pilot. So I have a very considerable personal understanding of the issues involved, and the ambition and the inspiration and the joy that flight gives to young men and women across this country, and has done for generations. And I fully recognise the point made by the honourable member opposite about the increasing importance of the relentless focus on improving the diversity within the sector. He's absolutely right about that on every dimension. Now, having said that, what we have here, as far as I can tell, is the disorderly liquidation of 3 local aviation training operators. And that carries with itself tremendous disruption and difficulty, and of course it exacerbates the impact, because, as members have said, an individual can literally turn up one day or receive an email, as colleagues, constituents have done, saying that the institution to which they confided their hopes and their dreams and a lot of money has gone completely unexpectedly, without any notice, into liquidation, and they may receive, and in many cases will receive, nothing of all of the money that they have contributed. So that is understood. It is important, however, when we think about the wider picture, to put this into perspective. Now, I am advised, and I offer this to the Chamber, because it is a correction of some number that's been used, and I think it's true, I'm advised by civil servants it's true, that in 2023 there were 11,675 applications for training across all licenses in aviation. So we are talking about terrible local impacts on a relatively small number of people so far, and we're talking about 3 failures of ATOs among some 270 registered flight schools across the UK. And this is not for a second to derogate from the tremendous importance of and the extreme sadness and, in some cases, grief that's been inflicted by this, only to say that making general rules on the basis of a relatively small portion of the whole sector is something that one needs to bear in mind. And of course, when we think about the enormous sums that have been lost in some cases, we are talking about people who are in commercial licenses, the very top of the pyramid, and therefore as close as one could be to potentially long-term gainful employment. Now, I'll come to what the CAA is doing and the suggestions that have been made later, if I may, in my remarks. But let me just pick up a couple of points that have been raised rightly and importantly by the member for East Worthing and Shoreham. One of them was about the impact of the pandemic. And of course, he's absolutely right about that. It had a very, very difficult impact on the aviation industry generally, and of course, within that, on the training sector. And the government did, as he will recall, make every effort at very considerable cost to the taxpayer to try to support institutions, companies, individuals throughout the air transport sector. And that there was something like £8 billion of pandemic-related government support. That included support through loan guarantees, support for exporters, the Bank of England's COVID corporate financing facility, the coronavirus job retention scheme, which I was responsible for myself, the furlough scheme within the Treasury, and the airport and ground operations support scheme. So there was a tremendous amount of specific support for the sector given at what was itself a completely unexpected and dramatic change in our business and social and personal arrangements, economic arrangements. So he's absolutely right to focus on that. On fuel prices, he is, of course, also right that fuel prices have gone up, and that has had an effect, and that will have driven prices upwards. But I must say, and I would say this as a former financial secretary, that I do not share his view that a cut to VAT would be the answer to this problem. And there's a very simple reason, which is that there are many cases of sectors in the UK economy which have called for VAT cuts in a very small number of cases, because VAT is, by design, a deliberately broad-based tax. There have been changes made to levels of VAT, and indeed reductions, and very often these have not been passed on as any kind of saving to the end user. They have gone to support the margins of the company, and of course, in the training operator business, there may be some value of that, but of course, it's in the normal course of things that in a competitive industry, private sector industry, there will be inevitably organisations that for various reasons do not manage themselves effectively or go bust for other reasons. So, of course, we'd like to.
This is not a huge mass industry, that it's not beyond the wit of a regulator or the Treasury to make sure that those VAT savings are directly passed on, or else they wouldn't be eligible for them. But even if he won't consider this to the future, does he not think that there's a moral case for those students who have lost their fees and are severely out of pocket, at least to be refunded the VAT element that they've paid, which has gone to the Treasury or may still go to the Treasury for a service which they've not actually received?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and of course, I'm not making policy from where I stand. I was speaking as a former Treasury Minister about the general attitude towards VAT and the general problem, which is that no government of any stamp can compel a private company to pass on a saving to its consumers. And indeed, whether or not savings are passed on is itself a function of the competitive conditions in the sector. As regards to what the CAA can do, I'll come on to that later on in my remarks. But I don't think that, although I understand the concern that he has about cost of VAT, let me also remind him, of course, that the taxpayer is going to be a very significant loser from the failure of these companies themselves. And of course, I recognise a certain strength to the point he's making about, as it were, the general taxpayer not being, as it were, the individual student being recognised in that. And of course, if he wishes to raise that with the Treasury or with Baroness Sphere, he's very welcome to do that. But the general policy, as far as I'm aware, is the one that I'm enunciating for the government, of course.
Chris. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and I'm just trying to reflect on some of the things he said about VAT. Specifically, one of the clear points that was raised, which is we're at a competitive disadvantage because we charge and no other country in Europe's charging. So if you're looking at the decline in flying schools, the pressures on or the issues with financing in the first place to able to go and study, and then you're asked to pay 20% on top, what's to stop any young aspiring pilot just going, wait a minute, I'll just go to Europe, I won't have this extra 20% surcharge?
Well, of course, individuals are welcome to consider all the options, and I'm sure will want to consider all the options under all circumstances. I haven't accepted, by the way, his narrative that the sector is in decline. We have got a couple, in fact, three important local failures of flying schools that have been given. But in general, the sector's rebounded remarkably well from the pandemic, and I would not accept that it's in decline. And in fact, in many ways, it's made a robust recovery. And let me also say one other thing, which goes to the point, really a question that he raised in his own remarks, which is, of course, he highlighted the failure of Tayside aviation. But, of course, it is absolutely, as far as I understand it, is absolutely within the power of the Scottish Government not to change VAT, but to provide some grant intervention to Tayside Aviation if it had wished, either as an education provider or under the heading of industrial strategy, both of which are devolved areas. I don't know if he wants to comment on whether the Scottish Government had considered that either as a matter of intervention at the time or now in order to support Tayside Aviation if it wished to get back up as a trading entity. He doesn't respond. Let me press on. The question that we're raising, therefore, Sir Robert, is what we can do to support these students under the very difficult circumstances they found themselves. And let me just talk about that for a second. The CAA has a responsibility for flight safety rather than for the financial well-being of these flight schools. And the CAA, nevertheless, has, I think, understood and recognised that there is every benefit to the UK from seeking to retain the value of the students' training that has existed so far. And they have enabled this transfer of training records to other ATOs so that wherever possible, training is not lost. It is also lies within the CAA's power to extend the 18-month period in which students restart their training, and they can do so on a case-by-case basis for anyone who's caught out by exam timescales or other aspects. And of course, it's also been mentioned by the member opposite that there is an important development, which is the idea of first officer apprenticeships. Now, I don't share his rather negative approach to this. I think this is an important development and something which can itself then be further built on. And it may not provide the full total towards the training, but it is a very substantial contribution, and it still remains available for sponsors of apprenticeships outside the individual student to help to support, as they do in other industries, the student who wishes to complete the training under that framework. It's also important to say that treating ATOs as higher education providers would itself carry costs to them. So they would be required to register as higher education providers with the Office for Students. There would be a number of regulatory burdens which ATOs might wish to take on, but which they might very well decide they did not want to submit. And some of those would address the issue concerned here, for example, through student protection plans, through compliance with consumer protection laws, Ofsted inspections, quality and standards assessment, and the like. And this may be something that my honourable friend wishes to pick up with the noble lady Baroness Veer when he sees her, but it's a matter of empirical investigation as to whether or not ATOs would be interested and treated as a competitive trading advantage for them to register as higher education providers with the Office of Students. So, yes, of course.
Treasury background on this. Does the Minister accept that the student loan scheme is an investment in the value of what an educated person brings to society? And so if they recognise it for an arts degree and the value which will relate to their salary, that's very, very commendable. Recognising it for a pilot doesn't relate to the school they go to, but relates to the individual. and applying it to the pilot who will be in the higher echelons of earning, probably from day one in a jet company, surely they recognise that value of bringing a soft loan to them and giving a soft loan to them under the students' loan scheme would be of great benefit to society, because society would get the money back quicker. Is that not a value?
I think that's a very interesting question, and the honourable gentleman is right to raise it. I've already talked about one scheme in which an approach similar to that is taken, which is not a loan scheme, but it's an apprenticeship scheme. In terms of loans, there would be the problem I've raised of the need to register with the Office of Students in the way he's described. Of course, as one goes up the flight training tree, you get further away from basic education and closer to a commercially valuable proposition, which it's in the interest of companies in the aviation sector to support and finance. And there may well be other things that can be done. I'm sorry?
Not unlike a doctor or a lawyer. You get further up the commercial tree in your training. And so it has that cross-application that a pilot who's maybe doing instrument rating and instrument readings and training in that is a skill, like an engineering skill.
Well, he goes to a very interesting and somewhat philosophical question. I don't pretend to get enormously detained here on this issue, but the reasons why, in the case of doctors, for example, the support has been given is historically because these doctors then go and work for the majority, perhaps all of their careers in the NHS, in the discharge of a public function. Now, if doctors left immediately to go and join commercial medical organisations, which an increasing number of them are in some cases, then it might well be that from a public sector perspective, the philosophical question of whether or not they should be supported by the taxpayer would be raised. I think we're in the same space of discussion. That's interesting. Let me just say, if I may, a couple of other things. So, of course, the department is working with industry and the Education Schools Funding Agency on the First Officer's Apprenticeship, as I've mentioned, and that, I think, has an important role to play in this. But, and let me just pick up one other little thing that was just raised by colleagues before I close, which is the Honourable Member for Dundee, who said, I should say Dundee West, who raised the question of PSOs. And of course, that doesn't directly have anything to do with this debate, but it is important, and let me just say that we recognise as a government that PSOs are important to meet regional connectivity and levelling up objectives. As I understand it, I think he said Dundee Council has recently undertaken a tender for a new contract on the route from the end of October, and the department has said it will consider the application obviously not appropriate for me to prejudge that in a debate now in Parliament, but the government is very much looking forward to seeing that application and will judge it, of course, on its merits in the usual way in due course. With that, I think I'll sit down. Thank you, Sir Robert.
I'm not going to take